Imagine if you had an MBA in sales, something that's going to give you the direct guidance, insights, strategy, and tactics that you need to make sure that you're performing on a day-to-day consistent basis, hitting your numbers and finding success. I mean, that would be pretty awesome, wouldn't it? Well, you're in luck today. We're going to talk about just that. And we're going to break down specifically 3 things that you need to make sure you're doing in order to be able to help you when it comes towards your enterprise level sales and being sure that you're running the right strategies. You're going to love this. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist Podcast. I'm your host, Donald C. Kelly, the Sales Evangelist. And I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And on this episode, we have an amazing guest. His name is Douglas Cole. I got a chance to interview him. He's a sales leader at LinkedIn. He's also a lecturer and also teaches sales professionals and business owners and folks like you and me. But he's, in addition to that, he's also an author of an amazing book. And I want you to check it out. You can find more information about it here in the show notes. I'm going to put some links back to it, but you can find all the details there. But essentially, it's an MBA for sales, the sales MBA, all around how to influence corporate buyers. No matter what you sell right now, many of us are behaving, or our prospects are behaving like their corporate clients. They have multiple individuals a part of the buying process, and you need to help to influence them. But how do you do this well? How do you do it consistently? And this is what this book and this episode is going to talk about today. As you know, sales is tough as it is, but you want to make sure you're using the right tools and the right strategies. And that's what we seek to do on this podcast. You can also check out our sponsors because they're giving you some amazing offers and deals that I feel that you could benefit from tremendously and can help you out. I want you to find all of their information down in the show notes. As we dive in, you get a chance to hear a little bit more about Douglas, also his experience, but you get a chance to understand these 3 main pillars and how this can help you as you're going for more corporate executives, and specifically what you can do to ensure that you're helping to influence the deal in your favor. Check it out. Douglas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Donald.
I'm really looking forward to it. There's nothing like getting schooled, getting a good MBA, and especially an MBA in sales. You know, that could change somebody's life. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today. I bragged about you a little bit in a teaser, but tell us a little bit more about what you do, man.
Yeah, I mean, I wear 2 hats, professionally speaking. So my day job is I'm a sales leader at LinkedIn. I lead a team of sales professionals who are trying to grow LinkedIn's relationship with very large enterprise customers. And then I wear a teaching hat. And so I teach courses both outside LinkedIn with the Rotman School, with the Schulich Executive Education Center. And then inside LinkedIn, I teach some leadership development courses as well. So those are the 2 hats, sales leader and educator, basically.
So you're someone that you just don't like to be bored, huh? You always got something to do. You never get bored.
Definitely a bit of a compulsive nature, yeah.
Well, I'm grateful for that because I find people like you can really give us great direction and great insights, because not only you're doing it as a practitioner, but clearly you're helping other people and helping other organizations. So you're able to gather a lot of information, intel. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
So when it comes towards like SDRs or BDRs, and it's AEs, as my experience, and especially with you guys just came out with Deep Sales from LinkedIn. We're seeing that more and more of the buying process is resembling this idea of the enterprise level purchase, where there's so many more people involved, or people want us to come to the table with a little more insights and so forth. And I feel their salespeople mess up a lot when it comes to this, especially going after enterprise level deals. And you brought up there's 3 main points. I want to tackle those, but with all of this, you even wrote a book to help sales professionals. Would you be willing to just take a second and talk to us about the book, the MBA Sales, and Sales MBA, and how this ties back to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, the journey to that book, it all happened within the context of my working at LinkedIn, and then also working, as I said before, with my side projects, these education side projects. And what happened was when I joined LinkedIn, I realized that there was a need within the sales team for a certain kind of sales training, which is not typically made available. I felt that I had this long background in consulting and business school and that sort of thing. And so I'd learned a bunch of things related to business acumen that would be very useful and valuable to salespeople. And it wasn't, generally speaking, part of the typical salesperson's education. So I set about building a mini MBA for sales within LinkedIn. And as I built that curriculum and as I started getting feedback from the sellers and figuring out what was resonating and what wasn't, it got me more and more interested in the topic, and I started to iterate and refine it. And I took it to the external environment as well and started to test out some of those concepts with startup founders and with some of the students I'm working with. And then ultimately I just decided, this needs to be codified somehow. This needs to be put into a book form. I need to make this, a kind of intellectual artifact in some way. And so that's what drove me to write the book. I realized it was going to be more painful not to write the book than to write it. So I wrote the book, and the whole purpose of the book really is to, the foundation of the book is that, I'm trying to define what I consider to be the core foundations of really effective enterprise sellers, people who sell to corporate buyers. And I'm trying to extract the most the first principles of sales excellence from the top performers that I've seen in terms of the way you can influence corporate buyers. So that's the basic purpose of the book.
Well, man, absolutely love it. And we have a link down below into show notes so folks can get access to that. But let's talk about that idea though. I'm a sales rep. I need to get access and connect more with executives. And we know they're part of, especially when you're working with multiple different stakeholders, you're going to inevitably have some of them be those executives, those CXOs. The three areas you mentioned is that one, strategist, two, change agent, and three, the decision architect.
Yeah.
Can we take time to break each of those down and how these will play an effort in helping us to connect and to sell to these executives?
Yeah, sure. Let me explain to you briefly
Sure.
why I have these three as the core pillars of the book, and then we can perhaps look at each one. So basically what I'm arguing is that if you really think about what's going on in the case of a sales conversation between a sales professional and a corporate buyer, what's really going on there, in my judgment, is you have three different conversations or three different dynamics that are influencing that conversation, or that impact that conversation. So one of those dynamics, one dimension, are the external dynamics. In other words, the company's competitive position, its market-facing position, the degree to which it is differentiated from other companies that are trying to do something similar in that space. Those are all the external dynamics. That's something you need to understand on some level. Then you have the organizational dynamics. You have things that are happening within that company at any given time. You have dominant themes, you have influential people, all those things that sort of shape the organizational context. Those are also going to impact that conversation. And then the third dimension is this interpersonal dimension, the basic laws of human psychology and how those are manifested in your interactions with that person. So every sales conversation, it involves these three, or can be seen through these three filters. You have these external dynamics, organizational dynamics, and interpersonal dynamics. And my argument in this book is that people who are at the top of the game in enterprise sales, people who achieve excellence, they are effectively functioning as strategists, and that pertains to the external environment. They are functioning as change agents, and that it relates to the organizational environment. And they are functioning as decision architects, and that relates to the interpersonal dimension. So what I try to do then in the book is I try to break down each of those components and define some and present some key questions or considerations and frameworks to help you get better as a strategist, as a change agent, as a decision architect.
So with all of that, then let's break down the strategist component, because I've always said this to in my sales approach, but now I think you make a logical argument around it that makes more sense with it. But let's talk about being a strategist. Let's give me the strategist from the very, very beginning of that process. That's going to help me.
Yeah, well, the first thing I do in the strategy section is I try to address the word strategy, because, as you know, strategy is one of these words, like many words in business, that get bandied about, and they've sort of lost their meaning. And many of these words become, buzzwords. And 99% of the time when people use the word strategy, what they really mean, they basically are trying to say higher level thinking. That's what the word strategy means. But it's helpful, I think, to have more precise understanding of what a business strategy actually is, because that is relevant to a sales professional. And what strategy actually means, if you boil it down to its essence, it's really two questions. Where does this company compete? Where have they chosen to compete? And how will they win? Those are the two most important questions pertaining to strategy. In other words, every company, in order to define a viable strategy, has to have made a decision about choices and trade-offs. They must have decided, we don't want to go into that particular industry. We don't want to go into that particular market. We want to focus in this particular area, and we want to target that particular target buyer, because that's where we feel we have the greatest advantage. And the whole advantage piece is the other component to it. A company must have a sense of how they compare to alternatives that are available in the market. What are their relative strengths in comparison with those alternatives? So when you, as a salesperson, understand those two questions, when you understand where a company has chosen to compete and how they can win within that space, you can be said to understand that company's strategy, and therefore you are much better equipped to have an actual strategic conversation when you're going to an executive, either through an initial outreach or in subsequent meetings, and you can actually talk to those two questions. You can actually make the connection between your product and your service and how it is that this company is going to win within their chosen area of competition. That's when you're having an actual strategic conversation.
How do I understand how they're going to win without asking that to executive? Is that me doing research with lower end folks in the organization, gathering insights?
Well, you can go about this in two ways. If we're talking about a public company, then you can read information about that firm, of course. You can read the 10K, you can read investor reports, you can read transcripts of investor calls, all of which should give you a sense of how this company perceives their competitive advantages, why they think people will buy from them as opposed to someone else, right? And so you should be able to extract that kind of insight from those sorts of sources. If it's not a public company, then it is a matter of becoming a kind of investigative journalist, which is par for the course for a salesperson, to talk to people at the lower level and try to deduce what you can about the things that are being emphasized in their go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. Okay. So now that I understand the idea of strategists, where will they compete, or where are they competing, and how will they win? The concept of change agent, how does that apply in helping in this process?
Yeah. So what I do in this section is I talk about, first of all, it's important to understand with change that change is within an organizational context, it's closer to chemistry than to physics. In other words, it is less a matter of overcoming physical resistance, sort of pushing a chair out of the way. That's the sort of physics analogy. It's less that than it is a matter of finding the catalyst, finding the small thing that you can introduce to a chemical reaction in order to get, a larger reaction and transformation. In other words, what I think really matters most to the change agent mindset in sales is you really need to ask, once again, in each of these sections, I try to boil it down to two questions. And for this section, I think the two most relevant questions are, where is the existing energy in this organization, and how can I feed that energy? So it's not a matter of trying to convince someone to go left when they're already going right. It's a matter of saying, well, which direction are they already going in, and how can I help them go faster in that direction with the support of my product or service? So at any given time in a company, generally speaking, there are initiatives that command the attention of the people in that company. There are agenda items that are constantly coming up in internal meetings and company all hands meetings, and it's your responsibility, again, to use that investigative journalist comparison, it's your responsibility to find out what those dominant themes are so that you can find a way to influence and feed that energy.
Can we go through an example of one that we could that you probably would find in a typical sales process or one that you've had in the past?
Yeah, I mean,
And then, well,
sure, sure. Yeah, I can tell the story of a woman I know, top performer, who I use this example in the book, and she had a program within a company that was an existing program, but it was a small program. It only had a certain number of users, small number of users, but the program could have been massive because we were talking about a major telecom provider, and so it could have been substantial. And she had to find a way to grow that program. So she went through this process of just asking around and figuring out what these dominant themes were. And she found out that there was one theme that was dominant. It was sort of related. It related to digital transformation. I don't want to give the exact phrase because I want to, respect the privacy of the client.
yeah,
But it was it was a phrase that related to digital transformation, and she found a way to focus everything that she was trying to offer this client, under the banner of that theme. And so she said, okay, we are going to help drive that particular agenda, and we're going to focus on one or two core skills that our platform will give the sales team in order to advance that agenda. And we're going to build social consensus and advocacy around that initiative and so forth. So she went through a process of starting with that existing energy source within the organization, and then systematically building a framework to support it, which included tapping into people's personal interests, building social support, through influential people within the organization, and also embedding herself within structural components of that organization in their live training sessions, in their regular meetings, and so forth. So I make in that section, I talk about a best-in-class change framework that one can use. Once you've identified that energy source, I talk about these three legs of the stool, which are personal interest, social influences, and structural surroundings. And so the example that I was just giving you goes in detail as to how she did that.
brilliant. And I think go back to the idea of the strategies. I think so many sellers, like we get put in a situation where maybe we're outgoing or whatnot. We get into this world, or we maybe chase the base, chase the dollars, and we see some good stuff there, and we feel that it's going to be easy, but it takes like thinking. It takes like a plan, a strategy, in order to be able to get to and to work with executives, especially at enterprise level. Because both of these areas so far, point number one and point number two, is just kind of like thinking like, bro, this is not like your great grandfather's way of selling or
Yeah.
grandpa's. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's a very good observation. And in fact, it ties to a report that just came out. You've probably seen it. You seem on top of all the latest stuff. But there was a report that came out from LinkedIn a few weeks ago called the State of Sales 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And in that report, one of their findings, they surveyed hundreds of salespeople, including top performers, people who achieve 150% of their quota. And what they found was that the top performers actually spend less time in selling activities compared to average performers. And I think what this says is it speaks to the point that you just made, which is that selling is actually for the best, for the people who are at the top. Selling it's a thinking game. These people who are doing the best, they are carving out space to think and to try to work through, well, how am I aligning to this company's strategy, and how am I architecting a change program such that I'm getting them to move collectively in a different, or in the right direction. So yeah, just a long-winded way of agreeing with you.
I love it, man. Well, let's talk about the decision architect. And I know there's a couple questions that's associated with that as well.
Yeah, the decision architect is this third dimension that I mentioned, which is the interpersonal. So what I'm suggesting here, this section is very, very heavily influenced by behavioral economics, which is a branch of economics, relatively recent, that came out in the last couple of decades in explicit opposition to traditional economics. So traditional economics used to assume that at the individual level and at the society level, people make decisions based on rational calculations. It assumed that all the decisions happening in the economy could be predicted based on rational considerations. And what behavioral economics did was they came forth that some of the key people who founded it, like Richard Thaler and Daniel Kahneman and people like this, they came forth and they said, no, this is clearly not true. And there's all kind of evidence now to show that people do not make decisions based on rational considerations. There are all these unconscious, all these biases that systematically distort the way we think through things. And the reason why behavioral economics is really important to the area of sales is that there's a core framework at the heart of it, behavioral economics, which is very, very applicable to sales. And what behavioral economics says is that we are all bounded. We're limited as humans by these bounds of our attention and bounds of our rationality and bounds of our self-interest. And this really stood out to me because when I started thinking about the sales challenge, I realized that these same bounds are exactly what a sales professional has to contend with. Because if you think about what happens in a sale, the very first thing you have to do is you have to get someone's attention, and so therefore you are working within bounds of attention. The very next thing you need to do is you need to get that client to make a judgment about your product or service, and this means that you're working within bounds of rationality. The way people make that judgment is not necessarily rational. And the third thing that you need to do as a seller is you need to get that buyer to act, to move in a certain direction. And in that sense, you are working within bounds of self-interest. So the behavioral economics framework is directly applicable to what sellers are grappling with on a regular basis. And so what I do in that section is I talk about a couple of important principles within each of these bounds and provide people with a sense of, or an explanation of that principle, and then some applications of it based on real life examples that I've seen and just been in myself, actually.
Can we go into one of those examples?
Sure, yeah. So one of them is, one of the things I talk about is that we are living, as we all know, in this informationally dense environment, and it's just increasingly difficult to break through in that environment. What this means is that this goes to the bounds of attention. People are more and more inclined. Your buyers are more and more inclined to rely on these shorthand cues to come to an immediate assessment of something that's coming in their inbox or being presented to them in some way. And so what I talk about is it's important to understand influence levers. It's important to understand what are these shorthand cues that humans rely on in order to very, very quickly triage the information that they're bombarded with. And so I talk about these influence levers, and these are not new concepts. These have actually been around for quite some time. Robert Cialdini introduced these back in the 80s. But concepts like social proof and authority and reciprocity and scarcity and things like this are incredibly powerful as a way of radically simplifying our complex environment. And so I walked through an example of how a top performer wrote a prospecting email that got an immediate response from a client. And I was really struck by the speed with which she got that response. And I looked at her email and I started to see that there were all kinds of ways in which she was consciously or unconsciously incorporating all these influence levers into that simple 3-paragraph message. There were just so many cases of all the things I just mentioned: likability, social proof, authority, reciprocity, scarcity. They were all embedded in her email. And so what I do in that particular example is I sort of talk about how important it is to internalize these concepts and make sure, particularly when you are trying to put together a consequential outreach to someone or presentation, think about the way in which you're using these influence levers, because they're just more and more relevant as the world gets increasingly overwhelming.
Bro, I mean, like, I'm just like night and day. If you all haven't done so already, you can tell that I'm a fan of what Douglas is sharing, and I would highly recommend you go down in the show notes and check out the book, and also check out follow Douglas for some of the great things that he's sharing here. I mean, these three areas here, I think it's going to be helpful, and I mentioned to you before we started recording this idea that it doesn't matter what you're selling these days. Like, I feel like so many companies, and this has come back, and even in the state of sales that you all share at LinkedIn, like it just seems like more and more of our buyers are behaving like enterprise level buyers, and the order taker days are gone. I wouldn't even say numbered anymore. They're not hitting numbers. They're not
progressing or succeeding. But if I'm a seller and I'm trying to figure out this stuff here and trying to figure out how I can get started with it, what's the first thing I should focus on if I want to change my mindset, leave from that order taker world and to more think like this, and to be able to tackle some of these enterprise level deals with executives? What's the first thing you would tell me to do after this episode?
Well, yeah,
I know that's a mouthful, right?
well, it's a very legitimate question. It's a tough question. It's a tough question for me to answer because my instinct when it comes to that question is to provide an answer which sounds as if it's a really tall order, but I really do view it as being the first order of business, so to speak. I said the reason why I wrote this book fundamentally, I mean, I talked about one of the reasons already, but another really important reason is that I believe in the importance of mindset. I really believe in the importance of how you see yourself as a seller. I really believe that when you watch the progression of sellers from novices to experts, there's this noticeable progression that you see. When they start out, they tend to be very likable because they're unconscious about asking a busy stranger to buy something, and so they try to be as charming as possible to process that internal discomfort. And then as they get better, they becomes much more about mutuality and building these win-win outcomes with a client. And it's only after a lot of time that a seller gets to a point of being legitimately, plausibly objective, achieving that level of objectivity with a client, being seen as a trusted advisor. What I want to do in this book and what I'm suggesting as a first step is that you need to embrace the fact that being a sales professional is there's a lot more substance to it than people have traditionally assumed. And that's the reason I'm using these terms of becoming a strategist, becoming a change agent, becoming a decision architect. The first thing I'm recommending in this sense is that you begin to think of yourself that way. You begin to think of yourself not as someone who's just a coin-operated seller, who's trying to maximize transaction velocity within the quarter. When you start to think of yourself as someone who actually needs to have something to say about those external dynamics, those organizational dynamics, and those interpersonal dynamics, then it sort of raises the stakes of your game, and it changes your theory of the game. And I think it gives you a higher sense of responsibility to your craft. And so that's my number one recommendation. I would say it's not an easy thing to do, but I think it's the keystone or the cornerstone of your development.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I love it. And you're the expert on that. So this got me excited, and I got some notes here, and I know it's going to pump us up as sales professionals and help us to get out there. But folks want to get connected with you too, Douglas. They're going to go check out the book. We got links to that. But if they want to get connected to you, what's the best way for them to go about doing so?
The best way is on LinkedIn would be one, and I've just started a newsletter in the last month on Substack. You can go to thesalesmba.ca and you can sign up for the newsletter there. And I'd love it if you bought the book, of course, on Amazon. If you do like it, please review it. That'd be great.
Love it. Listen, man, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Thanks for the work and sharing your expertise with us. I know it's going to help many of us and improve our lives, and I just appreciate that. So thanks.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Hey, that was Douglas Cole. And if you haven't done so already, connect with him on LinkedIn. I have his information down in the bio. Please do yourself a favor. It's going to help you tremendously. I mean, as always, I bring on folks like this on the podcast to help you. We want you to find more of your ideal customers. We want you to know what to say when you reach out to them. We want you to close more deals. You could go to our website and check out our free resources, and you can find all the details there about our free courses and whatnot. Again, make sure to go back to Doug's profile, go down in the show notes, check out his book. You can find it on Amazon. Buy it, leave him a rating and review. I know he would greatly appreciate that. Again, as always, I want you to thrive and succeed. I want you to raise your level of thinking. I want you to go out and do big things. Thanks so much for watching.